Some of his most prominent past lawyers, like Giuliani and Eastman, were recently named co-conspirators in those DOJ charges and could ultimately be indicted. The whole scandal has echoes of Nixon's All the President's Men, though now it would be all the ex-presidents or defendants' lawyers. Our special report right now turns to a lawyer at the center of all this, a man who campaigned for Trump in both of his presidential bids, who did serve in the White House, who aided efforts to overturn the 2020 results, and who has staked out a very special legal role in Trump's clashes with Jack Smith. At the New York trial, you can actually see him right there. That's a big prime seat right next to local New York counsel at Donald Trump's arraignment table for his first ever criminal arraignment. The man you see there is Boris Epshteyn. He speaks to Trump many times, sometimes up to 5 times a day, according to the Washington Post, and not only serves as a Trump lawyer, but has risen to a kind of first among equals status or more because he oversees many, if not all, of the lawyers, including some with far more experience on Trump's team. Now, this is a huge rise for a person who was factually not a senior Republican strategist before Trump came along to national politics. If you go to 2016, the landscape had many senior experienced Republican operatives who either would not work for Trump, who was seen widely as being on a path to losing, or Republican veterans who would only kind of support Trump selectively at the time. They wouldn't defend all his antics or alleged conduct. But Boris Epshteyn went all in. He distinguished himself as Trump's TV attack dog, as the New York Times put it, and he hit all the notes the boss wanted, which is relevant right now because as Epshteyn takes on this larger role, it's worth recalling his history. He actually went from the role, at least publicly in his own words, of kind of a reasonable, pro-choice, moderate Republican pundit, someone who could nod to the Clintons' political success and saw Trump as a, quote, novelty. He went from that to the fire-breathing MAGA incarnate we know today. Here's a little bit of before and after.
In a state where abortion is legal within certain parameters and where contraception is also legal.
Barack Obama may have won in 2008 North Carolina due to illegal voting. Go ahead, Jake. Sorry.
Boris, where are you getting that from?
Bill Clinton is a very popular president.
No doubt.
Hillary Clinton is very well liked right now, one of the most popular politicians we have. As far as the weak excuses go, Hillary Clinton tried to use the movie Lincoln by her buddy Spielberg as an excuse for lying to the American people. I think Trump will be almost a novelty candidate. What's Hillary Clinton done? She's only caused for the DOJ and FBI hire more people to investigate her. Is that the threshold to be president now, not to go to jail?
Now, the talk of candidates going to prison, well, it might echo differently. Trump facing these 3 criminal trials, possible jail time. But you can see the Epshteyn arc there. He defended Trump at all costs, blatantly lied about illegal voting there early back in the day without evidence, something that continued through 2020. And then President Trump tapped Epshteyn for a role in the White House. Now, his stint there in government didn't last long, but he still found ways to stay in the mix. We have a photo here of him getting back into the White House in 2019. And like Steve Bannon and other figures who have complex emotional relationships with Donald Trump, Epshteyn knew that the boss, even if he trashed you or kicked you out, at the end of the day, he values PR and TV above almost everything. And so Epshteyn took his experience to the conservative media outlet Sinclair, where he did recorded segments that advanced many Trump positions, defended his former boss, and even called in an appearance for the outlet here and there. So Epshteyn clearly stayed relevant, but it actually took more to get him to where he is now at that table, running point on Trump's legal cases. Trump aides say he's a deeply valued member of the team, doing a terrific job shepherding the legal efforts. And the Times reports on how it was Epshteyn who recommended, helped hire, and negotiated pay for several lawyers working for Mr. Trump right now. Now, many factors could be at play, but one thing that's clearly evident tonight and relevant as we're tracking whether any of these individuals break or flip is Epshteyn kind of rebooted that 2016 strategy I mentioned after Trump lost the 2020 election. Because you had, again, this sort of fissure, and most aides and lawyers would not do all the things Trump demanded to steal the election. Epshteyn, though, again, went where others would not. He has not been charged with any election crime, and he does defend his conduct, which we will show you. But Epshteyn was working directly with Rudy Giuliani, now DOJ's co-conspirator number one, on the efforts to overturn state results and to install fraudulent electors. And he rose further, becoming critical to Donald Trump's post-election, post-loss operation, a sort of special bizarro world where the people willing to deal with an election loss rather than achieve an election win were the most valuable people to Trump. As several outlets here you see note that. And Epstein later discussed some of the coup efforts that Trump is now indicted for under questioning here on The Beat.
That was part of the process to make sure there were alternate electors. Everything that was done illegally by the Trump legal team, according to the rules and under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani.
Epstein name-checking Giuliani back before, that clip was before DOJ named Mr. Giuliani a co-conspirator. So now DOJ views him as indictable for that same related coup conduct, along with some of those other lawyers, including John Eastman, named co-conspirator too. And his lawyer recently confirmed that to us. That's evidence from the Jack Smith indictment, which also shows Eastman emailing Boris Epstein. Both of them were quite public about the brazen plot to get then Vice President Pence to lie and claim he had some sort of unilateral power to cancel national elections, which no vice president has. Pence, of course, refused the plot, Epstein discussing that in our interview as well. One of the questions swirling around the DOJ probe is Boris Epstein the sixth unidentified co-conspirator? We don't know. Some messages point to that person being Epstein, as the New York Times has reported. But there is no confirmation, no report that confirmed who that sixth person is, even as we've basically identified the other five. DOJ certainly didn't and won't say. Epstein declined to comment on the record when recently reached by MSNBC with that very question. Now, what is clear is that none of this so far seems to be reducing Epstein's position with defendant Trump. The Times headline said it quite bluntly. He helps Trump navigate legal peril while under scrutiny himself. Even apart from the coup probe, which includes those many issues I just mentioned, there are separate accusations that Epstein groped two women in 2021. Video released just last week related to that allegation. Epstein pled guilty to disorderly conduct, and the sexual misconduct cases were later dropped. Now, some Trump legal vets are quite open in their disdain for Epstein, a Trump White House lawyer insulting him in public. Another leaking anonymously, I don't know where Epstein filed his law license. They must be selling them at 7-Eleven. And it's clear some of those experienced litigators that I mentioned that were tapped to help Trump with the very high-stakes cases that Jack Smith has brought, they're the most serious. Those individuals have come, some of them, to view Epstein as a barrier towards the professional goal that they are all supposed to share of giving Donald Trump the best possible ongoing valid legal counsel and defense. So if you're watching this as a fan of Donald Trump or a civil libertarian concerned that he should get the best possible legal help, that everyone should ideally be afforded that in our system when the government is trying to arraign and convict you, well, even from that perspective, this is pretty interesting because those fellow travelers with that goal disagree over Epstein. Here's what one of those lawyers said who had served on Trump's legal defense team with the Jack Smith cases after leaving that team.
There are certain individuals that made defending the president much harder than it needed to be. Boris Epstein, who had really done everything he could to try to block us, to prevent us from doing what we could to defend the president.
Now, that's an interesting twist. We just showed that Epstein really rode the political, legal arc of doing whatever and anything Trump wants, including defending everything Trump does. But now you have an actual, more experienced litigator hired for that purpose saying Epstein was getting in the way. And if it sounds like a conflict or a paradox or someone must be lying, you have to remember, and we showed this last week with the way that Donald Trump has so completely brazenly played himself, that sometimes doing what Trump wants is actually bad for Trump. That as a lawyer, just like other people who do types of expert service, a doctor, is there to, of course, serve the client, the patient, but also give their expertise in counsel. And if the patient or the client has really bad ideas that they think are great, well, a no-nonsense, honest person who's not afraid will just tell the client or patient, well, this is why you're wrong, and here's what we should do. And that would seem to be one of the pieces of tension between Mr. Parlatore, who I've also interviewed on this program, and Mr. Epstein, who I've also interviewed. Now, in fairness, that kind of infighting is not new to Trump world, but the stakes are so much higher. Nixon's Watergate problems fully unraveled when lawyer John Dean flipped, and those president's men we mentioned got into much trouble. Now Jack Smith has put at least 6 people in Trump's orbit on notice as co-conspirators. Now, whether that leads to further charges or new evidence is still an open question, just like the question over the unknown cutout you see on your screen. Who is co-conspirator 6? As a fair journalist, I mentioned some clues and possibilities, but we do not know. We cannot confirm that. So when it comes to the secrets to success in Trump world, as mentioned earlier, for Epstein, it's no secret anymore. It was his political loyalty, even above perhaps legal acumen. It was his zealous advocacy, especially on TV, and his repeated and demonstrated willingness to go where other Trump Republicans won't, to do what other Trump aides will not. That clearly catapulted him to the top of the orbit of the most important Republican in the Republican Party right now, someone who, for all his legal problems, could still be the nominee. And that's all even with the alleged demerits raised by colleagues, lawyers, and others around Mr. Epstein. So all of that might have gotten him right here. It might got him to be among the company of other lawyers, and maybe he got on the right side of that line. Maybe he found a way to name-check Giuliani, to do some of the bidding, but not be named a co-conspirator. Or maybe the DOJ ultimately will determine things that put him under more legal scrutiny.